Okay, so John mentioned that he did the reading this morning. Thank you, John. Mike, you did it also?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we'll go through Revelation 12 briefly, and then I'll talk some about Revelation 13 through 18. So Revelation 12, and I don't know if you did you guys look at the documents I put online?
Yes.
Pretty cool how you can click on the passages and the comments come up. I thought that was great.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Okay.
So, all right. So Revelation 12, this is another one of those passages which is central to understanding what's going on in the Revelation. I think the purpose of the chapter is really to explain to the um, people in the first century and to us why Christ's people are persecuted and not at home here in the world, and then also what true Christian faith actually leads to and looks like, how it could be summarized. And so I think both of those are main points in the chapter. So let's just read here. I'll comment as we go through. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant when was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, in which she is to be nourished for 1260 days. So that first 6 verses is the basic story, and then that's told again starting in verse 7. So we have a recapitulation going on with more detail starting in verse 7. And the basic characters in the story are the Old Testament people of God, who are symbolized by the woman. And if you were to look at, if you're looking at the document I put together, you could just click on Genesis 37, 9 through 11, or you could go look at it. But that's Joseph's dream, where I'll just read the relevant section, 9 through 11. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you? And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. So you have in Revelation, the woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. And this is referencing back to this dream of Joseph. This is understood by pretty much everybody to be the people of God. The woman is the people of God. So the people of God in the Old Testament was pregnant and crying out. She's about to give birth. And the dragon, who is that ancient serpent, the devil, and by referencing that way, it's referencing back to Genesis 3, right? And is there, and he is going to, he wants to devour the child. So he's trying to prevent the birth coming to fruition, right? But she gives birth to a male child who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. That's from Psalm 2. It's an ascension passage, very important for the Revelation. You should spend time in Psalm 2. And her child was caught up to God in his throne, Daniel 7, another ascension passage being talked about there. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, in which she is to be nourished for 1260 days. So she goes into the wilderness. This, of course, is a vision and a picture. And the wilderness is actually, this is an Exodus reference, where the people of Israel go out into the wilderness specifically to worship and meet with God. And in the wilderness, he takes care of them, provides for them, and leads them during that period of time. And so this is kind of a reference to not to the Exodus time period, but to the way that God deals with his people by protecting them in the hostile environment. The wilderness is generally thought of as not habitable, not civilized, hostile environment. So God takes care of them. So the devil is unsuccessful, right? He's unsuccessful in destroying the child. And the child, in fact, is caught up to heaven and made King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And that's what the ascension passages are meant to convey. And so, and then the reference to Genesis 3 about the ancient serpent, the devil, that's going to be brought out again a little bit later in the passage. And the significance of that for the people of God is that the reason that they're being persecuted is because the dragon hates the woman and her offspring, and he always has. And so the second part of this is just kind of an expansion on that, and it adds some things to it. So verse 7, now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. So I want to say something about this. Dispensationalists, and this has gotten into the popular Christian culture, like to teach that this is the fall of Satan, pre-creation of the world, fall of Satan, and that he took 1/3 of the angels from the earlier part of the passage was tail, swept 1/3 of the stars from heaven. This is not the fall of Satan. This is connected to the ascension of the child who has become King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And the name given to the devil is Satan. He's called the devil and Satan, and Satan means accuser. So what we're seeing here is the accuser being tossed out of the heavenly court. He's no longer there accusing God's people. You can compare it with Job and see in Job, Satan is there accusing God's people in the heavenly court, but he's not there anymore. He's lost his position. He's been tossed out. As far as
So a
taking
quick
it,
note on that
yeah.
for Job,
yeah,
is when they meet up in that the heavenly council there, and God says, "Hey, where you been?" And Satan says, "I've been wandering to and fro on the earth," right?
right.
So that can be a little confusing, but that doesn't mean that before Satan was thrown down to earth here in this passage that Satan couldn't wander the earth. He just he's not allowed in heaven, kind of a thing, right?
Right, barred from heaven because his accusations have no merit. Right, his whole position is as an accuser has been completely vitiated by Christ's work, right? So he's cast out of heaven as the accuser, and so he, as the passage goes on, it's going to say now he's going to look and try to, attack God's people, the rest of God's people, right? So the Jewish church is safe, basically, is the picture that we get here. And he goes out to attack the rest of God's people, which are the Gentiles, the Gentile church. And that's relevant for the first century audience because all 7 of those churches are Gentile churches. So why are they going through this trouble? Well, because the dragon hates the woman and he hates the children or the child. He hates the child and the child's or the woman's other offspring, which are the people of God, Jew and Gentile. So I guess I also wanted to mention something about the 1/3 of the stars. So it says the dragon was a great dragon, and the word there is mega or megas. And what that means is gigantic. And most interpreters who pick up on that say that in John's vision, the dragon is so big he can't see 1/3 of the stars. And that's basically what it means. So it's just showing the monstrous proportions of this dragon.
Got it. So if you were to be looking up and seeing the dragon and the stars behind him, he's so big that as he moves his tail, it appears he's concealing a third of the stars,
Right,
essentially.
right. So, and whether or not that's correct is, is debatable, obviously. But
Mhm.
going off of the word that's used to describe the dragon as gigantic, because giganticness doesn't have anything to do with throwing down stars, right? The size actually doesn't, but it would have a view of obscuring the stars. So
So, but it says
yeah,
hurled.
right,
Oh,
right, it does. So I'm just so visionary language again is figurative. It's representing something other than what it's saying. So, again, anyway, because it says hurled is why I am expressed some tentativeness about the giganticness. I think it is saying he's gigantic and he is obscuring stars. And I think probably that's how we're to understand it. Not that it's about the stars, but that it's about the size and the threat posed by this dragon.
But then in verse 9 there, I mean, it says when he is thrown down to the earth, we've established that that's not the fall of Satan, but that's just his banishment from heaven.
Right.
But it does mention that his angels were thrown down with him, so he's not alone.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, yes. So I guess to
great.
I
So they kicked him out of heaven just to hang out with us on earth. Well,
yeah, there you go. No, as far as that, yeah, that's a good observation, Mike. So yeah, I think that neither of the viewpoints can be established with certainty. I guess I'll say that. And so even if obviously verse 9 is just saying, or is saying at least, that Satan can't enter heaven and his angels can't. His following angels can't enter heaven, and that could be a reference to 1/3 of the stars. But it sounds like if you take the 1/3 of the stars in the first part, it sounds more like these are good angels that are now converted. And so I guess that's where my resistance is to that, because I am sure that this is not about the fall of Satan.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, I would read this then sort of plainly to say in the way that the great dragon was banished. There were other angelic beings that were also banished at the same time.
Yeah, along with him, anybody who shared his disposition of rebellion. Right. So the story so far is the Old Testament, the prophecies of the Old Testament are kind of come true. That's the woman in labor. The Old Testament people of God are going to bring forth the Messiah, and the dragon tries to prevent them. And you can think of Herod and the slaughter of the children and all of that. But he's unsuccessful. He doesn't successfully throw Christ off in his earthly ministry, doesn't successfully prevent Christ from redeeming his people. So Christ is exalted to the right hand of God, where that's the caught up to heaven, and he becomes receives all authority. And at that point, since Christ has successfully redeemed his people, the devil has no grounds now for all of his accusations are completely baseless, and so he's tossed out of the heavenly court. And so and then at that point we get to verse 10, and I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ has come. Obviously that is a ascension or post-ascension statement, because the authority of Christ has come. So what's being highlighted here Same thing we saw in Revelation 4 and 5 is the ascension of Christ. Same thing we saw when Christ calls himself the Son of Man. And that when he says the Son of Man coming with clouds, these are all ascension passages. So the ascension becomes very important. And then continuing with verse 10, I think I'm still in, yeah. The accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before God, before our God. So that's that just underscores what I said earlier, that the significance of the passage is about the throwing out of the accuser. And they have conquered him. This is the most important verse for the people of God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they love not their lives even unto death. So the people of God are told that the saints who have preceded them have conquered the onslaughts of the devil by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And then this very significant, for they love not their lives even unto death. So this is the martyr attitude, which is being promoted here as appropriate to the people of God. That not that the people of God go out and seek martyrdom, but that their life is secondary to the glory of Christ. In fact, it's infinitely less important than the glory of Christ. So when it comes down to it, and it's, do you love your life or do you love your Lord? They're always going to go to, we love our Lord. I will give up my life for my Lord. And so this is the message to the people in the Revelation who are being prepared for the difficult time that they're going to go through. That just as Christ gave up his life for you because he loved you, you also love him in like manner. And not that all of them will be martyred, but that all of them should be. I mean, this is how we grow in sanctification. We say, your will is much more important than my will. Your glory is more important than my glory. Your life is more important than my life. And so it's what's being enjoined upon them is to imitate the faithful people in the Old Testament period of time and to imitate Christ. And so this becomes very central to the understanding of the revelation that's going on there. So then verse 12, therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. And when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness to the place where she is to be nourished for a time and times and half a time. This is again, it's Exodus and Daniel. And both of those were also the earlier references. The serpent poured out water like a river out of his mouth after the woman to sweep her away with a flood. But the earth came to the help of the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from his mouth. So again, an apocalyptic image, not to be taken literally. Not sure what the reference is. If you look at the commentators, they're all over the place about what's going on here. I think the best understanding is just to say that the dragon is not successful. So whatever he does, he's just not successful. And that the people of God are protected by God providentially in this world. Then the dragon.
Are there commentators who, I've heard commentary around how the dragon and the beasts throughout Revelation, there seems to be a good bit of counterfeiting going on. The dragon and the beast are essentially, you see them trying to mirror what God is doing.
Yeah, dragon, the beast, and the false prophet, the unholy trinity, right?
Yeah, the unholy. Yeah. So here, a flood. The dragon is trying to employ a flood to destroy what what he doesn't like, as a, sort of an imitation of what God did after the fall.
Yes, yeah, you get a lot of mimicry
Yeah.
that the devil does, or at least in the visions. And of course, the devil, the point of the mimicry in the visions is that the devil is completely derivative.
Right.
He's not original, and
No.
he's not,
Doesn't have any of his own powers or anything.
yeah, he can just take things that God has made and try to pervert them.
Right.
So,
It's actually very instructive of what we do often in thinking we have, our own autonomous way of sort of deciding things and
yeah.
doing things.
Mhm, mhm. So the other thing that people have said here, well, I'll just mention it, is that floodwaters are sometimes taken by interpreters to mean false teaching. And I don't know exactly where they get that from, but I know that it's really popular to say that. And certainly, I think probably they got there this way. What does the devil do that really messes with the church? Yeah, false teaching. I think that's probably how they got there.
Yeah, and the flood emerged from his mouth.
Right, right.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it could be that. I think that the more, so I'll say it like this. Let's say it is false teaching. And so the vision teaches that the devil is unsuccessful when he brings false teaching against the church, and that God protects his people. But isn't it also true that if the devil brings terrible temptation, that God protects his people? Or if the devil brings persecution, that
Yeah.
God protects his
I
people?
think it's
always
more
true.
general than just false teaching.
Right.
It's just outpouring all of the temptations that the world has, all of the earthly pretend, whatever, like everything that the earth that Satan can use to try to entice people to turn away from God. Like he's pouring that out. It's a flood because he's pulling out all the stops and all of his tricks. He's kind of throwing them all at once.
Right. Yeah. So I think even if it was just meant, if it's specifically saying one thing like false teaching, that one thing is just a stand-in for everything.
Right. Yeah. Deception, general
Yeah.
deception, right?
Right. So I think at the end of the day, the pages and pages of arguments about what this could possibly be, I think
Yeah.
it's a fruitless waste of time. Excuse me for 1 second. My wife is.
Sure.
Have a nice day. It's
Uh,
kind of like
Hold on. Sorry, she's saying something to me. Hold on.
no, it's fine.
Okay, I'm back. Go ahead, John.
Well, it's funny because there's people that want to take over, kind of collapse our side, like Flower and Pivens, if you're aware of them. The
No.
top down, bottom out, inside out.
Okay.
That's what they want to do to our society. Have it come from top down, bottom up, inside out.
Right.
And it's the same idea. It's coming from every angle, basically overwhelming and collapsing a society, and it's very biblical in a sense.
Yes, it is. Yes, it
Anyway,
is.
Very
All right.
in the bad way.
satanic is what you meant. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's the better word. Yeah, not
So
biblical.
Yep. So verse 17, then the dragon became furious with the woman, went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, so that'd be the Gentiles. I have other sheep that I must preach to, etc. On those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus, and he stood on the sand of the sea. So that's the woman, the child, and the dragon, basically. And that's the central vision in the Revelation. It's given for the comfort and encouragement of God's people that the devil will try terrible things, but he will not be successful in the most important thing, which is destroying the church and taking glory away from Christ, because he's been exalted and all the authority's been taken away from the kingdoms of this world and from Satan by implication, and that he has no ground to accuse God's people anymore. And so there's nothing nothing to worry about as far as that goes. You might be worried about it's going to be physically uncomfortable and maybe mentally a little bit stressful when difficult things happen. But when you start thinking about, wait, this is about the rule of Christ and who he is, and who is the devil? Well, the devil is this derivative dragon who's got no actual power and will not be effective. So what is there actually to be worried about here? Because my God will take care of me, just because I'm part of when it says the woman, we're not talking about Mary, we're talking about the people of God, right? So the people of God are protected. So that's Revelation 12, and I did that really quick. And if we were in the typical Revelation study, that would have taken 2 months to go through. We would have looked at a lot more passages, but that's the basic overview of what's going on there in Revelation 12. So any thoughts about that before we move into the next section, which is the three great enemies of the church in the first century?
I guess it just has to be carefully read. Thing I've noticed, it has to be carefully read, because if you try to read it too much in like a sort of serial chronological and not, like you pointed out, there's retellings. It's sort of like Genesis, where you get a little section where it's giving you kind of an overview, and then it looks like you're on to the next step. But what you're doing is you're taking a more comprehensive view of what was just stated. And because here, what was kind of jarring for me in the very first section is the child is born and then almost immediately caught up. So you've got the birth of Christ, the incarnation, and then almost immediately the ascension. And if you read it a little too kind of as a blow by blow account, then it gets confusing, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to interpret the child caught up. I guess it's an obvious, and to his throne, it's an obvious ascension reference, but I was trying to read it a little too narratively, and it just is a little jarring to go from the birth almost directly to the ascension. And so I just find myself having to be careful about not reading this like a serial comic book kind of a approach, right?
I
Right.
kind of wish it was more like the serial comic book, but anyway.
Yeah. That does remind me, I have a comic version of the entire Bible, 6 volumes.
Oh, wow.
I haven't looked at the
Huh.
book of Revelation. I wonder how they do that.
Yeah. That could be pretty fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I
I
found
have
this.
this.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I have these. I keep thinking, well, how does the Mormons look at this? How does the Muslims look at this? And it's so confusing to us as a Christian. I can see where maybe they can get totally misinterpret this stuff if they wanted to, because of all the imagery and all that kind of stuff. I don't know if you can get that specific about that, and I don't want to go down a big bunny trail, but it keeps playing in my head. It's like, I don't know. I just want to throw that out there. Maybe got a couple thoughts.
Yeah, so briefly, Mormons and, well, not so much sure about Islam, about what they do with it, but so Mormonism is historically conditioned by other cults that arose around the same time, and their interpretations and things like that. Mormonism was first, 1830, 1828. But then shortly thereafter that, you've got Jehovah's Witnesses, 1874, and you get Mary Baker Eddy, Church of Christian Science.
Yeah, Christian Science.
And you have then paralleling with the rise of those last two, you have the rise of dispensationalism. This actually the first one, dispensationalism, was the first whiff of it we get in church history as far as a developed system with the main points of the modern system is actually 1830. And so same year as Mormonism is founded, and it gets developed more. It actually, the Jehovah's Witnesses eschatology is completely dispensational, and the Mormon eschatology is also very dispensational, taking elements from dispensationalism and from the Jehovah's Witnesses, and very, very similar. Mormonism is even though more bizarre though, because Mormonism combines elements of numerology and pyramidology. And I have books by a Mormon, not an apostle, but one of their main teachers from like 1940, where it's all about the Great Pyramid of Gaza and how those measurements in there have to do with the return of Christ. Now, the really bizarre thing about that is that Jehovah's Witnesses, the founder, Charles Taze Russell, was really into pyramidology. And he also he had a 7-volume series of books called Studies in the Scriptures, and the third one was devoted entirely to the Great Pyramid of Gaza and how measuring those lengths of, because that, God in Isaiah says that he's going to leave a witness in Egypt, and obviously that's the Great Pyramid of Gaza, or Giza, however you say it. Anyway, so there's pyramidology and there's dispensationalism kind of all mixed up, and the system that Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormonism comes up with is very similar. It just looks like a perversion of dispensationalism. And so futurist systems, right? They're basically all futurist systems. Not sure what Islam does with the revelation. Not sure that the revelation is part of their scripture. They're to believe the gospel, but it's not clear what they mean by that. Whether it's the
I was just curious. I don't know why that was playing on me so much, but
a book. There's books all the time about Islam has an idea that that there will be a Messiah that comes at the end of history along with the Antichrist. And so you can find books about that because they've been saying it's going to happen for the last, 25 years or something.
because I'm under the understanding, at least certain segments of the Muslim world, it's almost the exact opposite of how we view it. Like they almost want chaos to come among us and not have a peaceful society, because that will bring that's
it brings
the
the
end
eschaton,
times.
right?
Yeah.
Well, that's a product of a dispensational type of an approach, whether we see that in the American church, and you don't have to look very far to find instances where, say for instance, a Christian is at a university speaking. So this is Tom Sawyer. He's speaking at a Christian event about taking care of the poor and loving people and things like that. And in the question and answer time, a woman gets up and says, why should we be doing this? I mean, if we do this, things will get better and then Jesus won't come back. Okay, that is the actual attitude of a lot of people, right? Why should I evangelize? Yeah, we should vote for Prop 1 because things will get worse, stuff like that.
Yeah, that could explain why we're accelerating.
Yeah, bad
Anyway.
false teaching in the church. Yeah, back to the flood. Yeah. So okay, let's move into 3 great first century enemies, and obviously we're not going to say everything we can about them. My only purpose is to offer an identification for the 3 enemies, and the 3 enemies are going to be the beast from the sea, the beast from the land, and the whore of Babylon. We already know who the dragon is. Okay, so that one's easy. So Did you have a chance, both of you, to read through the document about this online? Okay, good.
Yeah,
Mike?
oops.
So this one here, the three great enemies one.
Yeah. If you didn't, it's okay.
I'm not sure if I don't think I did, because I read the
The passages.
4 or 5 chapters and it ended before this Whore of Babylon. So I saw this doc and I thought it was for once. Yeah, I didn't think it was for what we
Oh.
were talking about today.
Yeah, so I thought we were reading 12 through 18. That covers all the way through the fall of Babylon.
Okay, maybe I'll look at your email. I thought you said 12 through 17, but okay. I mean, I read it a few weeks ago.
Okay.
So
you're good.
yeah.
Yeah, so I'm basically just going to go through this document, and we'll look at other passages as they come up if they're, if we have time and we want to do that. But again, my basic intention is to try to try to identify who these images, these personages are being referring to. So the beast from the sea, this one's pretty easy. This is when we say the beast, this is what we mean. The number 666, the beast that persecutes the church, whose image is made by the false prophet, whose image talks, the beast who had a mortal head wound, and recovered, a parody of the resurrection. The beast from the sea, if you compare it, as I think we probably did this in this study, but if you were to look at Daniel 7, which is where the beast imagery comes from, you'll see that Daniel 7, the beasts are there interpreted as kings and kingdoms. And so there's a general or a generic kingdom, it's a kingdom, and then there's a specific, it's a particular king type of thing. And that type of thing is that generic and specific is also going to be used in the Revelation. But the fourth beast in Daniel 7 is a monstrous beast that crushes all the kingdoms, and just a terrible thing. And the other three beasts are described as animals that reappear in the description of this beast in Revelation 13. He's described as kind of a conglomeration, a combination of all four of the beasts, or of the fourth beast. It's basically the way people understand it is said. He's the fourth beast in Daniel 7. And the fourth beast in Daniel 7 is the Roman Empire. And the way that you get there is by looking at Daniel 7, and the beasts are presented sequentially and chronologically. And in Daniel 2, which is a parallel of Daniel 7, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream of a statue and made of 4 different metals. And that's also sequential and chronological how they're explained. Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon, is the head of gold. And then after that comes Medo-Persia, silver. And then bronze is Greece. And then the fourth one, which is not named in the text, as far as Rome is not named, but the other 3 are named, is the one that follows Greece, and that would be Rome. And so we have, and the way that we're evaluating the kingdoms is we're saying, well, which kingdoms were God's people subject to? Because what's being told is the story of God's people, not the story of world history. And so although there were other kingdoms, outside of these kingdoms that I just named, they didn't have anything to do with the Jews. The Jews were actually subject to the 4 kingdoms that I named chronologically from the time of Nebuchadnezzar all the way up to the time of Christ. And that's where Daniel's visions take you, to the time of Christ. So Revelation picks up at the end of the Daniel vision rather than at the beginning. When Daniel gets the vision, they're in the Babylonian period, the first beast. But now they're in the period of the last beast. In the Revelation, they're in the Roman period. And so the beast now is the Roman period, and he's described as the same monstrous trampling characteristics as Daniel's beast. with the addition of he's got characteristics of the three previous kingdoms, which totally makes sense because Rome was assimilating
Right.
previous kingdoms. So the beast is both the Roman Empire as a persecuting power and also specifically the emperor who is the head of the beast. And this emperor, I think, we talked about 666 and all that. I think the emperor here is Nero. So that one's easy. We're not going to spend much time on the beast. The Whore of Babylon is next. And the Whore of Babylon is, I want to look at several things about the Whore of Babylon. So first, she's pictured as being stoned. This is the punishment for harlotry, for being a whore. And it's the punishment laid out in Deuteronomy 22. We don't need to read it. If you guys have read it, you know that that's the case. So she's pictured as being stoned. The interesting passage, Revelation 16, 19 to 21, I'll read that. The great city split into three parts. Now this should remind you of Revelation 11, where 1/10 of the great city fell. So we're talking about the great city, and that was Jerusalem in chapter 11. So the great city split into three parts, and the cities of the nations collapsed, and God remembered Babylon the Great to give her the cup filled with the wine of the fury of his wrath. Every island fled away, and the mountains could not be found. And from the sky, huge hailstones, each weighing about 100 pounds, fell on people. And they cursed God on account of the plague of hail, because the plague was so terrible. That's a picture of stoning. She's being stoned, and who gets stoned, right? I mean, that's appropriate. You link that with being a harlot, being the whore of Babylon. And so we have this picture. Now she's also burned, a little bit later, stoned to death. She's burned. There's a couple of things that happen. So why is she burned? Well, a daughter of a priest who plays the harlot is to be burned in Leviticus 21:9. And then the Revelation passage, the angel said to me, Revelation 17, 15, 16, the waters you saw where the prostitute sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. The beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked, and they will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. So we have stoning and burning, and both of these are associated with harlotry. And now the second reference there is associated with being in the family of the priesthood, right? Daughter of the priest. So I guess I want to tell a little bit of the story of the revelation here. So the beast persecutes God's people. And what we just read was that the beast and the 10 horns of the beast will hate the prostitute. Right. So the 10 horns are basically the power, where the power is located. I'll just say it like that. And there have been different interpretations. Some people think the 10 horns are meant to be emperors in sequence, and others say no, they're rulers of the 10 provinces of Rome. And then other just means it's the complete 10 completeness, the complete authority of Rome. Anyway, what chapter 17 describes in these verses is that the beast turns against the woman. And what I'm going to be suggesting is that the woman is the apostate, harlot, adulteress, Jerusalem, and religious leaders, basically, of Israel. So it's the adulteress Israel. And that's why she is being stoned and why she's being burned as the daughter of a priest. And so what does this mean, that the beast turns against Israel? And isn't Israel... So basically the picture in the Revelation, if the beast, the beast is Rome and the woman is Israel. The story in the Revelation is that the woman basically draws the beast's attention, prior to chapter 17, draws the beast's attention to God's people. And the woman uses the power of the beast, manipulates the beast to attack God's people. And so God's people get attacked by the Roman power. And this is not a new tactic. You see the Pharisees doing that with Jesus, right? And you see them doing that all throughout Acts and everything. It's like, oh, get those Christians, they got another king, not Caesar, that kind of thing, right?
Stirring up riots and things like that, and saying, look at what those Christians are doing.
Right, because they actually have no actual judicial authority, right? But they can get the Romans to do it, and so they're after the Romans for a long time until finally Rome realizes that the Christians are not a sect of Judaism, because the Romans were treating Christians as a sect of Judaism, and Judaism was called a licit or legal religion. And so they were allowed to practice and not be persecuted. It was not illegal. But Christians kind of piggybacked on that, not intentionally, but just how it turned out. The Romans thought they were Jews, and it was just a squabble between Jewish groups, right? But the Jews then became more and more insistent on, no, these people are not Jewish, So when they get identified then finally in the Roman eyes as being not Jewish, they are now not legal. Okay, their worship is now not legal. And so it becomes a target for persecution. So the whore of Babylon, who turns against God and then uses the beast to persecute God's people, now in chapter 17 is being turned against by the beast. And the beast ultimately then destroys, devours, and burns the woman, right? And so how does that happen? So the Jews became such an annoyance to the Roman Empire, not religiously, but just because the Jews on another front were trying to get their independence from Rome. And there was messianic thoughts were really high, and so they were thinking, let's revolt. And so they finally got the Romans just finally came to the point where they said, you know what, it's just too much trouble trying to keep these people under control. We're just gonna surround their main city and knock it to the ground and burn it with fire. And so the Romans turned against the Jews, and this is why Jerusalem gets destroyed. And so the story here is, the Romans are culpable for attacking the Christians, and the Jews are actually the basis for the Roman attack on the Christians, and so they're even more culpable. And that God, in His justice, uses the Romans to destroy the Jews. It's kind of funny. So that's what's going on there. So the whore of Babylon is dressed like a high priest. So this would also substantiate the identification with the Jewish religious authority, right? So the woman, Revelation 17:4-5, the woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. She had a golden cup in her hand, filled with abominable things and with the filth of her adulteries, and the name written on her forehead was a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. And then again in Revelation 18, woe, woe to you, great city, dressed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. Exodus 28, which we won't read, but you probably all remember, is about the dress of the high priest and the breastplate with the precious stones and the pearls on it, and about the tiara or the turban that he had on his head with a thing on his forehead that said "Holy to the Lord," rather than Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and abominations of the earth. Turns out that Babylon the Great, the whore of Babylon, is dressed just like a high priest, including the tiara, all the way down. And so you read that and you think, well, okay, so now we got punishment for adultery, punishment for daughter of a priest, dressed like a high priest. This is sounding like Jewish religious type of association here, right? So then we already know the harlot is a city. We already read that in a couple of the great city, the city. We read that in 2 passages, and there's one more which I listed there. And she's a persecutor of the saints. And Revelation 18:24. So I'm on point 5 now on page 3. In her was found the blood of the prophets and of God's holy people, of all. Wait, let me read that again. In her was found the blood of the prophets and of God's holy people, of all who have been slaughtered on the earth. And then Revelation 16, the third angel poured out his bowl on the rivers and springs of water, and they became blood. And then I heard the angel of the waters say, you are just in these judgments, O Holy One, for you who are and who were, for they have shed the blood of your holy people and your prophets, and you have given them blood to drink as they deserve. And then again, Revelation 17, I saw that the woman was drunk on the blood of God's holy people, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. So some people will read these passages and think, yeah, it's the Romans, they're persecuting the church. But actually, it's the blood of the prophets and of God's holy people and all who have been slaughtered on the earth. This is reminiscent of Jesus saying about Jerusalem, you kill all the prophets, right? And he says that over and over again. And so, and in fact, if you're talking about prophets, you're most likely talking about Old Testament prophets, and Rome never killed an Old Testament prophet. So we have another thing that would indicate that probably what we're talking about here is a picture of Jerusalem as a whore of Babylon. And then in chapter number 6 here in about the bride. So a little bit later, the bride is introduced, and the bride is indicated, or the way she's introduced is the bride is the opposite of the harlot. And so we'll read Revelation 17:1 about the harlot. This is how the harlot is introduced. One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits by many waters. When the bride's introduced in chapter 21, one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls full of the 7 last plagues came and said to me, come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. Structurally, verbally, it's structured the same. You're meant to see that there's a parallel between these two and that they're being contrasted. But what is the bride? Isn't the bride the New Jerusalem? The bride is the New Jerusalem. Right. And in the text, the church is called the New Jerusalem. So then what would be the anti-bride? Well, the Old Jerusalem. So then point 7 is, in the Old Testament, Israel is frequently compared to a prostitute for being unfaithful to the Lord and going after other gods. And I listed a bunch of passages, but that's the case because you've read the Old Testament. And the generation of Jesus' contemporaries is described by him as adulterous. So he's calling them prostitutes, calling them harlots. Number 8, the harlot is allied with the beast, who is the stronger entity in this relationship. And this describes the relationship between the first century Jewish leaders and the Roman power. So I'd like to read some of these. So let's look at, if you're online and you just click on John 19:6-15, it'll come up on your screen.
It's not working with my phone anyway.
Oh, it was working on my phone. I really liked it because it showed up at the bottom. That's too bad.
It's not working.
Which one was that, Chuck?
John 19:6-15 on page 4 at the bottom.
John 19. 6 through
15.
Yeah,
6 through
6-15.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Did it work for you, or are you at?
Yeah, all the comments on the right side.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's really neat.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm feeling left out here.
It's your browser. It's probably your
I
browser.
guess,
It
yeah.
doesn't show it on the phone. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of limited space on a phone to be able to do this. But
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not doing anything.
It actually does show it on the phone. It's really cool.
yeah.
It just doesn't
Huh.
show it on John's phone.
What kind of phone do you have?
This is an iPhone
So do I.
13 mini.
Huh.
All right. So then
Okay.
to read this, then let's see. Maybe verse 12 we'll start with. From then on, Pilate sought to release him, Jesus. But the Jews cried out, if you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar. So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement, etc. See how they're using the Roman power to manipulate the Roman aggression?
Mhm.
It's like, oh, you rats, you know?
Hmm.
And then Acts 17:7, you get the same thing. Acts 17:7. Pick up in the middle of the quote. And Jason has received them, and they are all acting against the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, Jesus. These are Jews saying this. Jews don't think that Caesar is the king.
Mhm.
It's
They're being
really
bad boys.
bad boys, bad Jews. They're being bad Jews. Acts 21, 10 and 11. While we were, so Luke writing, while we were staying for many days, a prophet named Agabus came down from Judea, and coming to us, he took Peter's belt and bound his own feet and hands and said, "Thus says the Holy Spirit, this is how the Jews of Jerusalem will bind the man who owns this belt and deliver him into the hands of the Gentiles." Again, they're using the Romans to be their club to beat the Christians. Right? This is just typical. Acts 25, 2 through 8. It's about the Jews trying to kill Paul by arranging for Paul to be transported along this particular road, and then they were gonna ambush him. So they're manipulating the Roman power again. Let's not read that one right now because it's time consideration. We'll go to 1 Thessalonians 2, 14 to 16. For you, brothers, became imitators of the churches of God in Christ that are in Judea, for you suffered the same things from your countrymen as they did from the Jews, who killed both the Lord Jesus and the prophets, and drove us out, and displeased God, and oppose all mankind by hindering us from speaking to the Gentiles that they might be saved, so as always to fill up the measure of their sins. But wrath has come upon them at last. So this does not illustrate a link with the Romans, but what it does show is that Paul is writing in about 48 AD. He's saying the wrath of God is just about to come upon them, right now, for all the things they did. They killed all the prophets, just what is accused of them. That's the charge against them in Revelation. What Paul says here, the charge against them. And then John 11. This is the fear of the Jewish religious leaders. So the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council and said, "What are we to do? For this man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." So they're afraid that they're going to lose their position. They're afraid the Romans are going to overrun the nation and take away the Jewish identity, basically. Ironic, isn't it, that that's what happened? And so what they decide to do is to use the Roman power to their advantage. Right there. We're your friends. We love Caesar. This guy thinks there's another king. He thinks he's a king. Wow, anybody who says he's a king is the enemy of Caesar. We just wanted to point that out to you because we love Caesar. It's just, wow, so hypocritical.
I mean, it's kind of funny too. If they thought that was their promised king, they would have been using him to attack the Romans.
Right. Yep. Yeah. So the story in the Revelation is the prostitute aligns herself with forsakes God. That's why she's a prostitute, and aligns herself with the beast, the Roman power, and he manipulates the beast into persecuting God's people. And then the beast turns against the woman and destroys her. And you go, well, if we're looking for a first century relationship that progresses and ends like that, it's the religious leaders of the Jews, symbolized by Jerusalem, and the Roman authority, because that's what happens. Exactly, that is what happens. So so that is my suggestion for how to understand the harlot. And there are other ways that people understand the harlot, and I'm not going to go into those, but we can talk about those another time if you want to. So the false prophet, we have enough time to do this. Pretty awesome. So the false prophet is the beast from the land. And you see that in Revelation 13:11. I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had two horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. And if you remember in Revelation 13:1, the first beast, it says, I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns, 7 heads, etc. So we have a beast of the sea, that's the Roman power, and the sea in the Bible is often used to represent Gentile powers. It's just an image that, you know, the mighty waves are raging against God's people, but they're safe. Those types of images. The waves are the Gentile powers, and the sea is thought to be the place of, or associated with Gentiles, and the land or the earth, and earth there is land. It's the Greek word gar is translated land or earth. It variously translated that way. And of course, when we say the land, we're usually talking about Palestine and the Jews, Israel. So the false prophet has his origin from the land. He comes up out of the land. So this sounds just on the face of it like it might be something to do with Jewish people again. The false prophet is a religious authority. It says in verse 13:11, he looked like a lamb, but he spoke like a dragon. Right, so he looked like a lamb. This is a religious image, right? A lamb, and it's like a wolf in sheep's clothing, but even more religious because we're using a lamb here. Point B under 2, I have the entire context is religious. You know from reading the passages, it causes the beast to be worshipped. It's a parody of the resurrection. The beast has a fatal wound which had been healed. The land beast performs great signs. So signs are religious. The land beast deceives the inhabitants of the land into worshiping the beast. And the land beast has an image, an idol set up in worship. So it's very religious context. So it's probably a religious authority from the land in a religious context. Receives authority from the beast from the sea. So what this would be is that the Roman government says something like, you have authority to, or we will give authority to your ideas to persecute these people, something like that. The second beast, the false prophet, directs all worship to the beast or to its image. So the beast or its image, right? So the beast in this scenario would be the Roman Empire. Its image would just be the representative of the Roman Empire and the Roman power. And clearly, when the Jewish authorities are standing up there in front of the Jewish people and saying, we give credence to the idea that Caesar is Lord, they are directing all worship and attention in some way. They're saying you have to give allegiance to this Caesar is Lord, because that's what they do when they say to the Roman power, there's no other God, but no other king but Caesar, right? And they're doing that. The false prophet authorizes persecution against those who do not worship the beast or its image. And the punishment for being a false prophet is to be stoned to death. And this is actually what happens to the city of Jerusalem in the vision. And historically, I think I'll just mention this, although I don't think this is the fulfillment, but we read about the hailstones, right? That weighed 100 pounds each. So Josephus records that in the siege of Jerusalem, the Romans at one point used catapults. And there are a couple of things that are interesting about this. The first one is that the catapults weighed about 1 talent each. And that's how Josephus records it. And the talent is between 75 and 100 pounds. So, they're about 100 pounds each. So you got these stones being flung into Jerusalem by the Romans. And they used white stones because that's what was available. So they're throwing big white stones into Jerusalem. And the Jews, this is what Josephus records. It's actually pretty interesting. He says that the Jewish people would stand on the walls and they would see the stone coming. And in mockery of Christians, they said, "The sun cometh," instead of the stone. Look, here he comes in white. They've been saying he's going to come in white. Here he comes. The sun cometh. Mockery.
Wow.
Right. And so some people in the partial preterist camp would take the catapults and the white stones being flung over the weight about 100 pounds being thrown over the wall and landing in Jerusalem to be fulfilled, or a fulfillment of Revelation 16:19, where it says hailstones were being thrown at the city or coming down and hitting the city. I don't think so. I don't think that we're to look for particular one-on-one fulfillments like that. I think actually in the picture of the great harlot, that the harlot is stoned. And that's the thing you're supposed to get from it, not that, oh, it's a catapult. John's talking about a catapult. I don't, what kind of value is there in that, right? There's actually no, as far as I can tell, there's no real value in knowing it's a catapult. I mean, how does that encourage God's people? How do they understand that contextually? Because the context of these visions is the entire Bible, not the Roman war machine. So anyway, that's why I don't think so. So what we have here then in the 3 great enemies of the church are the beast from the sea, which is the Roman Empire, thought of as a persecuting power and also represented by the emperor, so generic and specific. You have the whore of Babylon, or Babylon the Great, which is the religious, the people, the Jewish people and religious leaders as looked at as God's people, religious people. And they're taking their association from God, and they're severing that relationship, turning their back on God, apostatizing, and committing now adultery with the Roman power. So they're looked at as an adulterer, as a harlot. And then the whore, or the false prophet, I think just has reference more specifically to the Jewish religious leaders who are perverting the worship of Israel by intermingling the faithfulness of God's people with, now they've got to bow the knee to Rome. And so so I think those are what's going on. And all of these things, this relationship between the beast and the false prophet, which is a subset of the whore of Babylon, that relationship is over after Jerusalem is destroyed. And so I think that what's happening now, other people, other interpretations are, legion, but basically that, if it's not a first century thing and it's still in our future, then this is, the beast is a revived Roman Empire. And seriously, I mean, this is what dispensationalist says, right? Revived Roman Empire. It's like, well, so you agree that it's the Roman Empire. And they think that the whore of Babylon is a rebuilt Babylon. And I think they've totally missed the religious clues there. But because it's not, Babylon isn't the thing that's being destroyed. It's the whore of Babylon that's being destroyed. So Babylon then becomes just another name for Rome. right? She's the whore of Babylon. She's the whore of Rome in that instance. And just in that regard, let's go to 1 Peter 5:13. 1 Peter 5:13. And then we'll end in just a couple of minutes because it's 9:15 right now. So 1 Peter 5:13. Do you have that, Mike?
Yeah, she who is at Babylon, who is likewise chosen, sends you greetings, and so does Mark, my son.
So this is Peter saying, she who is at Babylon, referring to the church. The thing is that Babylon wasn't in existence then. There was a little military outpost called Babylon, but very few, very, very few, like less than 1% of the people that I've consulted think that Peter wrote that letter from there. Tradition is, and this, which is basically followed by most commentators, the majority, like 95% of them, think that Peter wrote his letter from Rome. And so he's calling Rome Babylon. She, the church in Babylon, greets you. And so he's calling Rome Babylon, just like John does. He's calling Rome Babylon. Why would he call Rome Babylon? Well, after the fall of Jerusalem, Rome was called Babylon in Jewish literature and the Sibylline oracles and things like that. Because just like Babylon, Rome destroyed Jerusalem and scattered the people. That's what Babylon had done. But First Peter is written prior to the fall of Jerusalem, but Peter is also an inspired author. And I think he sees Rome, living under Roman authority, as being in exile. It's very similar to the oppressive exile in Babylon. And so he's calling Rome, I believe, there Babylon. And then the Holy Spirit again does the same thing in Revelation by calling, when the beast is also called Babylon, because the whore is the whore of the beast. She's the whore of Babylon. So anyway, so those are the three great enemies in the first century context. There are other ways that people have understood these. Ironically, many of them have to do with, this is rebuilt Rome. It's like, it's all the same players. They just show up again at the end of history. So anyway, for what it's worth, that's a partial preterist kind of a rundown of the main features that would help you give clues for what's going on there. Any thoughts about that?
Pretty convincing. I don't know.
Yeah, just, so I'm trying to give you big picture chunks so that when you read the Revelation, you can kind of follow the story, at least from the preterist interpretation, and see if it makes sense to you. We can talk about the other interpretations also as we have interest and time. So, yeah, so I think that's good. So let me know what your questions are during the week, what you would like to talk about, because otherwise I'll just keep kind of marching through the Revelation in big chunks and we'll be over it quickly here soon. It's at hand. I think that this is it's a good study, but I don't want to really take you through all the details, because then it would be another 3-year study. But I do want to help you understand, so I want to give you enough to help you navigate it yourself. So if this way big chunks isn't actually doing that, then let me know. So, all right, you were going to say something,
Thank
Mike?
you.
I was just going to say, no, I think it actually is helpful to, if something does come up, I think we can ask for clarification. But I think it is helpful for us to go into some level of detail like we are here, and then just sort of going through. It's obviously going to require us to, give us a broad view, and then require us to, review it and go through further detail, repeatedly. But I'm finding just the overall kind of pacing and flow that we've been going through here to be pretty helpful.
Good. Okay. Well, let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this
I'm
time.
sorry.
Thank you for this time, Lord. Give us hearts to follow you and wisdom to understand your word and to trust you. And we ask, Lord, that you would bless us today and help us and guide us as we go about the work that you have us to do. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you guys for changing your schedules, and thank you for all you're doing, Chuck.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
sure thing. Happy to do it. God bless you guys.
All right. Thanks. God bless.
Talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.